Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back for our webinar series. I hope everybody is enjoying this summer weather, even though it's November, but we're thrilled to be here today. So if you're not outside, thanks for joining us. And we have Dr. Jona Ludmir here with us, and I'm so excited to introduce him to you all. He is a cardiologist at MGH, and he splits his time between the CCU, the intensive care unit, and doing preventative cardiology. So it's really going to be fun to hear his perspective, and he is talking about happiness, well-being, and the heart. So welcome, Jona.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Dr. Kelly Hedgepeth and Dr. Lee Lewis for this invitation. I'm really thrilled to be here. I'm just going to share screens here and we can start. Excellent. So this afternoon, I'm going to be discussing happiness, well-being, and the heart. And why is this important? Well, it turns out, just like we were taught many, many years ago, maybe as we were kids, that we wear a heart on our sleeves, right? Sometimes our emotions are directly connected to how we think. And I really started thinking about this as I was going through all my training and started on as an attending physician. You know, in medical school, we learn to fix things. That's the simplified version, right? We want to make a diagnosis and get a patient better. And if there's something wrong, we address it. But we often neglect the other part of the patient, and that is the emotional health of the patient. And what I've come to see, and a lot of us are learning as we explore this further, is that how we feel, our emotional well-being, our overall well-being and happiness is directly connected to our physical well-being. So let's explore that further. So I want to define happiness and discuss how it relates to our overall well-being, discuss how happiness, mindfulness, and other lifestyle goals can help us achieve success, and then spend some time reflecting as a group. And I would love to hear all of your thoughts and questions. So let's go back a couple centuries ago to Sir William Harvey, a physician in the 17th century. And this is what he wrote and also thought about. For every affection of the mind that is attended with either pain or pleasure, hope or fear, is the cause of an agitation whose influence extends to the heart. So what he was getting at was that there is this direct brain-heart connection, mind, physical connection, right? What we feel, how our emotions are, can be directly connected to what's happening with our overall physical well-being and cardiovascular health. And this really works both ways. For a long time, we really only thought about the negative associations. We feel down, we feel depressed, we feel anxious, and how that can negatively affect our cardiovascular disease. We know that people who have these psychological symptoms have a higher risk of heart attacks, strokes, among other cardiovascular conditions. And perhaps the most extreme example is something called stress cardiomyopathy. And stress cardiomyopathy is often triggered by this really significant emotional stressor, deep sadness, grief, many other similar situations, natural disasters. And this emotional stress, sometimes it can also be triggered by physical stress, but often just emotional stress, directly impacts the release of certain molecules from the brain that can have a direct effect on the heart itself. And in this situation, it can actually affect the heart function and can even put people into shock, and they can end up in the ICU and even die from this. So this is an extreme example. But let's look at the opposite, and that's what I want to do today. Does positive psychological well-being promote cardiovascular health? In other words, if we feel happier, will our hearts be healthier? So first, let's define happiness, right? So happiness means something else for everyone, right? For some people, it's this delicious spread of candy. If you love skateboarding, going to a skateboard park, being out in the snow, hanging out with friends. The quintessential example from Charlie Brown, right? Happiness is a warm puppy, right? Everyone loves warm puppies. But how do we think about this a little bit, kind of a more academic sense? So there are a lot of definitions for happiness, and everyone should define happiness for themselves. This is a book from a professor, Professor Shell, who's actually a professor at Wharton, and he teaches a class called the Success Course. And he wrote this really excellent book. I highly recommend it. And he spends a lot of time both in the book and in his course talking about happiness and what that means to people and how people can achieve that. And so he breaks it down into 3 aspects. And I really think this is spot on. One, there is momentary happiness. So that is, you're walking down the street today, it's a beautiful day outside, and you appreciate the beautiful weather, or you appreciate the foliage, or a really cute puppy walking down the street. So that's momentary happiness. You have those few seconds or minutes where, wow, this is really cool. There is overall happiness. And this is the result of achieving long-term goals that require effort. And sometimes it's hard effort. So let's say you spend weeks and weeks building this really cool model for a project at work, and you struggle, but at the end of the day, it's like this really cool design, and you're really proud of it. And then there's wisdom experiences. And the best way of defining this is it's just the feeling you get when you know what you're doing is the right thing. So Dr. Shell, the professor, he actually describes it as when he's standing up in front of his students, he just feels this intense feeling that, this is what I should be doing. So these 3 things make up our overall sense of happiness. But we need to take that a little bit further, because it's not just about happiness, it's about our overall well-being. And Marty Seligman, who is a psychologist, and he actually focuses on positive psychology at the University of Pennsylvania, has written a lot of books, and I'll show you his website in a little bit. He talks about well-being as this 5-point component of this theory. And happiness is just one part of it. So this positive emotion, right, which incorporates a lot of what I just mentioned in terms of the definition of happiness. Engagement, that we are doing something to accomplish what we want to achieve. Relationships, right, that is that we have friends, family, acquaintances where we can connect to, because humans are naturally social people. Meaning that what we do, it's not just that we are happy about it, but there's deeper meaning to what we do. And then that there is a sense of accomplishment, right? You have spent years and years learning to be a lawyer or an architect or whatever it is, and you have accomplished what you are doing. So this just to show you the website, it's a phenomenal website. It's the Penn Positive Psychology Center. And I'm a big fan because I went to Penn as an undergrad and medical student. So Marty Seligman's work and aura was really all around campus, but it's a really, really incredible website and lots of great links to personal happiness and group happiness. So I highly encourage you to check it out. So that is happiness and well-being. How does it relate to the heart? And why were you even talking about this? So this is a really great seminar paper that came out from the Journal of the American College of Cardiology a couple of years ago. And lo and behold, Marty Seligman is one of the co-authors. But this paper really identified the connection, what we already highlighted, between our psychological well-being, our brain, our thoughts, to healthy behaviors, and therefore positive cardiovascular health. And this works both when we think positively, feel good about ourselves, we're exercising, we're eating better, therefore our outcomes are better. And then the converse, when we're feeling sad, maybe anxious, highly stressed, and maybe we don't exercise as much, maybe we're not eating as healthy, and that's going to have a negative effect of our health. And I add this arrow here because this is really a two-way street, right? The more we do in terms of healthy behaviors, the happier we can be, the more motivated we can be, the better our well-being is in place. Again, just to reiterate this very strong interconnected brain-heart connection. So let me give you two examples from the literature. So this was a study published in 2016 of over 75,000 nurses. And they surveyed these 75,000 plus nurses using a validated survey. It was an optimism survey. So this is how good you're feeling, right? How optimistic are you feeling about things today, things in the future? And what we discovered here was, and these are quartiles. So the most optimistic was level 4 here. The participants that were most optimistic had what's called a hazard ratio that was much lower than everyone else, meaning that when you were more optimistic, you had a less likelihood chance, or a lower risk of dying from heart disease, from stroke, from respiratory disease, from infection, and from cancer. So the summary here is, the happier, the more optimistic, the longer you lived. That's a simplified way of looking at this. Okay, what about another type of study? So this was patients in England. These were just volunteers who were perfectly healthy, had no medical issues whatsoever. And they did a similar survey study over 3 years. And they were following these patients to see if they would develop hypertension or high blood pressure. And the name of the study is actually very neat, taking the tension out of hypertension. So they measure what's called emotional vitality. And this is basically how good you feel about things, how emotionally regulated or positive you're feeling. And the patients that were most kind of optimistic or had the highest emotional vitality had a lower risk, about 11% lower risk of new onset high blood pressure, which is pretty neat. Okay, so let's take this and summarize it and think about how we go forward with this, right? We talked about the connection, but how do we accomplish that, and how do we maintain a healthy approach? And I know there have been many webinars and seminars about this, and this is something I find deeply important in my practice, both in the ICU and in clinic, and for myself. For myself, I have 3 kids. I often have to work nights in the ICU, and things can be very, very stressful, and high levels of anxiety, especially at 3 o'clock in the morning with either children or very critically ill patients. But taking this approach where I really focus on eating in a healthy way, I make time for physical activity, I manage stress, I try to maintain relationships with my family and friends. The sleep, I will admit, I need to work on more, and then avoiding risky substances. And I think the same thing goes for patients and family members, right? In the ICU, this still applies. There is a high incidence of stress, anxiety in the patient because they're critically ill and going through a really tough time, but also family members. So addressing some of these needs, making sure a family member can get some quality sleep, or the patient can get quality sleep in the ICU, is really important. And similarly, in clinic, in the outpatient world, it's not just about making sure everyone's on the right medicines and kind of checking all the boxes. This is just as important, right? Because incorporating these lifestyle approaches can sometimes help us get off of medicines, but also help us achieve happiness and success. So let's break it down a little bit more. What can we do, right? I mentioned mindfulness at the very beginning, and this kind of ties into that momentary happiness. So how do we go through really high intensity, busy days, but take those few seconds to find something that's special? So, for those people who have meetings after meetings, maybe taking 30 seconds between the next Zoom meeting and some deep breathing, or looking outside the window, or maybe doing 20 push-ups if that's something you want to do to rev up your heart rate. The other thing with mindfulness that I actually learned throughout my training is that you focus on one thing. This day and age, we are all interconnected. We have social media, we have our phones, and it's really hard to do one thing at a time. And as hard as it seems, when we just spend time focused on one task, things can actually work a little bit smoother, and we can be kind of more in tune and feel better about things. One example of that is, instead of incessantly checking or clicking refresh on our email, closing the email, maybe checking it twice a day, and have dedicating times for that. Gratitude, right? How do we go through our day and feel good about things? It's not only thinking that we're grateful. I'm grateful for this beautiful day. I'm grateful for my family. I'm grateful that my health is okay today. Feeling that and telling that to people is actually a nice way of rekindling happiness on a day-to-day basis. Optimism, right? We often, and it's natural, we go through hard times. The pandemic was and continues to be very challenging, but finding the glimmer of hope and finding what you're looking forward to can also be wonderful. Leveraging our strengths, right? We all have challenges. We all struggle. But when we find what we're really good at and brings us happiness and joy, that's something we need to hang on to, right? For me, I love exercising. I love playing soccer. And even when you're working 80 hours a week, finding that 1 hour can just refresh the week and make things exponentially better. If you love painting or drawing or reading novels, making that time for yourself by doing this can go a long way. And then again, how we incorporate the exercise, the healthy eating, the sleeping, and the other pillars of lifestyle medicine, because all those are intertwined and interrelated. So here are some examples, and this is again from the seminar paper I mentioned. And these were ideas of how you can promote positive psychological well-being, happiness in clinical encounters, but I see this also in day-to-day living and how you talk to people. So, the characteristic of optimism. What can you ask? How do you think things will go in the future? So things that support this. I have managed many patients with this health problem before, and I have seen many of them do very well. I think you can too. And this isn't just doctor-patient. This is really anyone, friends, family. I know you're going through a lot, but I've seen people succeed and do really well. A positive affect on life. How do you experience pleasure, happiness in your life? What makes you happy, right? Sometimes we don't even think about that. By doing that exercise and thinking about what makes us happy, maybe we'll take time to do those healthy hobbies or meaningful activities. Again, gratitude, I just mentioned it, but do you ever feel grateful about your health? Tell me about that. And then leveraging personal strengths. When have you applied your best skills to improve your health, right? So let me come back to me. I told you a little bit of myself, my 3 children, busy time in the ICU, and then doing other activities. It's tough. But at many points, what's kept me going is identifying what is my true north, right? True north is, what is that ultimate goal? What is it that really makes you happy, that defines who you are as a core, right? What do you want people to know you as? So for me, it's a couple of things. It's spending time with my family. It's being outside, with my wife and kids. We like going into nature. I love watching my son play soccer. For me, it's working out, creating meaningful relationships with patients and families. So doing this kind of work, being able to talk to all of you, I really do find this incredibly fulfilling. And similarly, doing the same thing with our trainees, our residents, our fellows, our medical students. So how do you do this? It's hard, but I think it's carving that time every day, right? Everyone can find that 10, 15, 20, 30 minutes, whatever it is, because by carving out time to pursue what your happiness goals are, your true north, your exercise, your healthy eating, that's going to have a positive effect on everything else. And similarly, if you're not getting close to your true north, right? If I was not doing any of this, I would not be in a great place. And if you're not able to do any of these because you're working 120 hours a week or whatever it is, then you need to make a change, right? You need to be able to take care of yourself so you can take care of everyone else. So I challenge all of you, and I would love to hear through the chat a few things. One, I would love everyone to just write out your true north, whether it's one thing, whether it's multiple things. Write it out. It's a great exercise, and it helps you think about what your priorities are. Many of us have incredibly busy lives, but identifying at least one thing where we can really channel our energy can make us feel good about ourselves. Write out your strengths. What are your hobbies? And then how are you going to make a change today, right? If you're unable to exercise, if you're unable to, pursue healthy eating, if you're sleeping 2 hours a night, pick one thing that you can change, right? And this is something I try to do with myself and my patients. So a few final thoughts, and then I'm going to open up to questions and hopefully some debate and discussion. Again, our emotional and physical health are directly interconnected. They work hand in hand. We cannot just address our physical health. We cannot just give a blood pressure, a cholesterol medication, a medication after a heart attack or for heart failure. It really has to go hand in hand with our emotional well-being. I've seen this time and time again with my patients in the ICU. We are able to save them, but we fail at addressing their underlying anxiety or depression, and the cycle continues. Happiness and well-being, even in times of stress, right? Finding that channel of happiness can help us maintain a healthy cardiovascular profile. So with that, I will pause. I will thank all of you for listening, and I'm looking forward to some questions here. And I always find these really cute exercise rocks. Double meaning here.
Exercise does rock. Thank you, Jona. That was such a great talk. So many great things that I think we can kind of dive in and discuss. I like us taking a minute and pausing just to think about happiness, because I do think it's one of those things that we all feel like we know, right? But when you are asked to define it, it's sometimes actually hard, right, to put into words. So I think it's nice for all of us to kind of reflect on, what that means to each of us and why. I also like to remind my patients and, point out to my family members too, that, having a happy life doesn't mean that you're never unhappy or there's not any suffering, right? I mean, I do think that sense of fulfillment and enjoyment and gratitude comes with having both the good and the bad, and having proper perspective, right? Which I do think that perspective is necessary, and is probably highlighted by your call for us to make time for our self-care, right? In order to be able to, reflect on that and define it for ourselves. How do you think about this and as you're going through your busy day? 3 kids, ICU work.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're spot on. It's so hard. And I think for me to kind of reflect a little bit more personally, at the height of COVID, I had, my wife and kids, and I was terrified of, especially the beginning, of bringing something home. And this is April 2020. We had no idea. We were just talking to our Italian and Chinese intensivist colleagues, and terrified. And the only thing, the few things that kept me going were, one, knowing that I had my family that I could reflect with at home and make time for that, but I would make the 20 minutes, half an hour every day to exercise, to completely disconnect and make me feel good about myself, but still had that underlying, really challenging, not sad, more anxious and stressed feeling, but integrating a couple happy moments throughout the day helped to achieve balance.
Yeah, I think that's spot on. I mean, I do think, as you reflect on, the things that are important to you, right? The things we get bogged down on day to day, if you're making that priority list, right? Those things usually never come up on your list of things that really matter to you, right? And I do think it's really critical to keep that bird's eye view, right, in stressful situations, right? So that you're really tethered to something. So I really like that approach. members in our audience, we do welcome you if you want to engage in this. It's so hard when it's a webinar to have a discussion, but if anybody does want to share something, Dara and I are happy, to read them and include them. Dara, any personal thoughts about your priorities and your happiness and gratitude? How are you approaching this?
No, I love this. And I have to say that I think like you, Jona, I think of it both as in my role as a physician, how I relate to my patients, but also in my life outside work with my family. And in both places, I agree, like happiness to me isn't the goal, but meaning or contentment is, because I think if you're always chasing happiness, that seems a little bit elusive. Mm-hmm. But I think we can all find contentment, satisfaction, meaning, engagement through those other things that are achievable, but also more kind of substantial. So for me, if I had to say, what's my true north at the end of every day, I want to say, did I make the world a better place today? Did I make somebody's life a little less painful? Did I bring some joy? Did I do something to make an impact? Maybe today, since tomorrow's election day, and I just want to remind everyone to vote, yes. That can be how you have your impact today, vote whatever direction is important to you, but to just not to give up, but to say, there is something I'm sure that each one of us can do every day that can make the world a little bit of a better place, a kindness, and as you say, just sharing your feelings to someone, telling them what you meant. I went to, this is a short story and a distraction, I'm sorry, but I went to my 40th high school reunion at Newton South High School on Saturday night. And I kind of was like, I don't really want to go. I don't really have any friends there. I don't keep in touch. But I saw a friend and I just burst into tears. I suddenly remembered how she had been there for me during a really hard time. And I just went up to her and I said, you were one of the few truly authentic, honest people I could trust in high school. And I just want to thank you. And it meant so much to me and to her. But just to get that off my chest and to express it and to feel it, it was a nice surprise for me to have that experience, which I think we don't do all the time.
Yeah.
But okay, that's enough about me. There is a really interesting question in the chat that I would like to bring up. Can you speak to the influence of chronic pain on happiness and cardiac health?
It's a great question. And, having a lot of patients and people that I know that struggle with chronic pain, but I think this also goes through challenging health problems, not just chronic pain. How do we, when we're struggling and constantly in pain, or again, I use the extreme example in the ICU, how do we incorporate a glimmer of happiness or our true north? And it's a challenge, but I think as both of you highlighted and myself, that it's incorporating it periodically throughout the day, right? We can have pain, we can struggle. Vividly in my mind, I think about one of my grandfathers and my grandmother actually, who struggled at them. They were in pain every single day. But when I got to talk to them, or when they talked to another grandchild or one of their children, there was a glimmer of hope. There was a smile. And for my grandparents, it was the connection. It was the relationship that brought hope and comfort. For some of you struggling with pain or critical illness or challenging illnesses, maybe it's the relationship, maybe it's nutritional eating, maybe it's exercise, maybe it's painting, whatever it is, it's different for everyone. Everyone has a different definition of happiness, achievement, true north. It's what brings you gratitude and makes you overall feel better, even in short periods. So again, going back to the ICU where patients are struggling and it's so hard, but sometimes, for example, just playing music can bring a smile to someone's face. Maybe for those couple seconds, they can reflect on the beauty of the music and zone out from the challenges of the intensive care unit. So similarly, for us that struggle day to day, it's incorporating a little bit that can boost our morale. And as I've shown, and there's more and more data evolving here, that overall well-being can have downstream positive effects. And while it seems far-fetched to be like, oh, if I'm happy for 5 minutes a day, I'm going to be okay, that's not quite it. But I think the better our morale is, the better our overall sense of ourselves, that often triggers downstream eating better, sleeping better, building relationships. So it's kind of one thing, as I mentioned, kind of builds onto each other.
It's funny that you mentioned music, because that makes me think of Dara and your activities this weekend, because I do think when you hear songs from your past, you are like brought right back to that time. And I do think that's also a useful therapy, right? For us to recognize our own mood and what's going on, and how music might actually transport our mood also to a different era, right? There definitely are, the science behind music. I don't know if you use that at all, Jona, in the ICU, right? But I mean, it's really powerful.
Mm-hmm. It's incredibly powerful. At some of the institutions where I trained, that was very much integrated into the ICU. There's actually a difference between music therapy and music in the ICU. Music therapy is done by specific therapists, which is also incredible, but often just playing the music that someone likes. Like, for example, a week or two ago, one of the patients loved classic rock. So playing classic rock actually flipped the mentality and just made things better for that hour. But music is powerful for everyone, right? I feel relaxed. I think, for most people, like you mentioned, it can be a drawback to some past experience, right? I associate a Rolling Stones song to a concert I went to 10, 15 years ago, and it makes me happy. Whatever it is, music has just this incredible power to transform us.
Interesting.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, I'm putting something in the chat that says something that I heard once that said happiness. This is shifting gears a little bit about one of the questions, is reality minus expectations. And somebody wants a comment on white coat hypertension, which I would love to hear your take on, as well as your take on the placebo effect and what we call the nocebo effect. So placebo effect, where you're expecting something good to happen from a pill or a procedure, and it does, even though that may be a dummy pill or a dummy procedure. Nocebo effect being the opposite, which is you're expecting something bad to happen, a side effect of a pill or an adverse outcome from a procedure, even if it's a dummy pill or a dummy procedure. And so our expectations also frame our happiness and our outcome. And I wonder if you could comment on that.
Yeah, I 100% agree with that. I think, that example, placebo, nocebo, is just incredibly powerful, right? And we see it day to day with having a lot of patients who have gone through or are currently participating in clinical trials, and we don't know what they're getting, but many of them are getting better. And we see this like on a one-to-one, but we also see it when we get the data out. I'm thinking of, there are many cardiac trials where we have seen the power of placebo. And again, it's exactly what Dr. Lee Lewis said. It's our expectations. And I'll give an example. So like patients who are struggling and you're thinking about, do they need to have a heart catheterization when they benefit from a procedure and maybe an implantation of a stent, right, the scaffold that holds open the artery? Well, in certain situations like a heart attack, that makes sense. I won't get into all the medicine here, but in many other situations, it actually doesn't make a huge difference. So setting expectations early makes a difference. A lot of patients will come and be like, I need stents. I know someone who had 10 stents and they feel great. Maybe reframing that and saying, you know what, medicine or doing this thing can have a similar effect, because sometimes the opposite happens. They go for it and no change happens. So setting expectations early and getting our mind into the right kind of mindset and framework can go a long way.
I couldn't agree more. And I think that has, your comments about positive outlook has, direct application for all of us, right, at some point in our lives. And I think this feeds into the question about white coat hypertension, right? So is your blood pressure elevated, only when you're in an anxiety provoking situation, which for some people it's spending time with us in the office. And I always joke, sometimes I do bring out the best in my patients, and sometimes it's not the best, and blood pressure does go, sky high. Do you want to give us your take on white coat hypertension and how you kind of manage expectations?
Yeah, so it's a very well recognized clinical entity. It happens, and I do feel like Dr. Kelly Hedgepeth said it is certainly connected to our underlying anxiety, and a lot of it might actually just be technical, right? Often patients come right into the office, they run in, or they're in traffic, they sit for an hour. Our anxiety levels might be a little bit high, me included, when I'm trying to run to an appointment. We take the blood pressure right away, it's going to be a little bit higher, versus the ideal way of taking blood pressure where we're waiting 10, 15, 20 minutes in a calm, zen manner. Assuming we do all that and it's still high, again, we sometimes have underlying high stress levels. Maybe we don't even feel it ourselves when we're in certain situations. I know I do. So my take with white coat hypertension is I always want to know what's happening in the real world, what's happening in your life at home in your day-to-day. So I am always a big fan of having people check blood pressures outside of the office, right? I don't just go by blood pressure today is 180 over 90. That's very high. That's an extreme example, but let's do a better example. Blood pressure is 140 over 90. Well, at home, it's always 110 over 70, and it's the right blood pressure cuff if we've calibrated it. Well, then, that is something unique to what's happening in this type of environment. Oh, does it happen at work too? Does it happen in certain other situations? So I like to explore where these underlying feelings may occur. And sometimes it's an opportunity to explore that further, right? Maybe it's bringing back something traumatic you had at some point. So for me, I remember as a child having traumatic experiences with a physician and even dentist. And I remember going back as I was getting older, and I would notice my heart would start racing without doing anything, right? I think certain situations and settings can trigger an underlying feeling, and addressing that head on can be helpful. But kind of to bring it back to the white coat hypertension, it's really important, again, I'll say, to explore things outside of the office.
Yeah, I love that. And I think, you don't want to miss high blood pressure either, right? So I will also just add, right, that, being in the office or in a doctor's office, sometimes that just characterizes an environment where we don't have control, right? And so that control piece is so important, right? So that maybe has blood pressure off, but there's this other element of, if most of my life I'm not in control and I'm an anxious person, and it turns out most of the day my blood pressure is running on the high side. 20 years ago, we used to, pat people on the head and say, fine, you're fine. And now we know, when we go back and look at that group, that we can actually see changes on their echo that their blood pressure was high, but it turns out their blood pressure was high a lot of the day, right? So I do think we want to make that distinction. So I hope that helps to answer that question on white coat hypertension. There's a somewhat kind of related response that said that telling a patient, don't worry, be happy, doesn't sound like the message here. And I would agree with you. And that's certainly not what we're trying to oversimplify. That I think understanding and getting to the core of what's driving anxiety for each of us, I think, is the ideal in a doctor-patient, right, relationship when we're taking that blood pressure into account.
Yes, that's exactly right, right? It's not just the simple, Bob Marley, don't worry, be happy, everything's going to be okay. Yes, we can think that way, but there's a lot that goes into it. And we're not always happy. Things aren't always easy. It's finding those moments that trigger, hopefully, more moments and trigger us to adopt some healthy lifestyle changes.
Exactly.
So we're in this world where we're constantly getting inputs, right? How do you help guide your patients to be mindful? That I think that was first, maybe on one of your first slides, right? To take a step back, not be so reactionary. Like, how do you think about this, and what practical advice do you have?
Yeah, so kind of back to what I was saying, when we have so many things coming at us, we have our phone that's like a encyclopedia 24/7, a dangerous encyclopedia sometimes. And we have social media, and the phone is beeping all the time. And then you're hearing a diagnosis here and there. And we're just on kind of overflow mode here. I think, one thing that's helped me, and has certainly helped a lot of my colleagues and patients, is just, you get all this information, pause. sometimes closing your eyes and it's deep breathing for 10 seconds. It's actually something that my dad taught me when I was a kid, and I never really put two and two together till I was learning about mindfulness and going through training. But it's trying to disconnect and focus on our breathing and then resurfacing and doing one thing at a time. It's so hard to have so many things coming in at once, but sometimes I always think, this has to go. This has to be put aside when you're doing something. It has to be silenced when you're in a meeting, when you're one-on-one with someone, when something is happening, because you need to be able to focus on one thing at a time. As hard as it sounds, and I think it's harder and harder for this current generation. I think about my younger cousins that are in their teenage years or 20s, and they cannot have a face-to-face conversation. It's a face-to-phone conversation, and it's really tough. But I think the more we do to focus ourselves, starting with a couple quick breaths, but then understanding that you need to tackle one thing at a time. Relating it back to medicine, let's say you get a diagnosis, let's go stick to the hypertension. You have hypertension and you're like struggling. Okay, which blood pressure medicine am I going to take? I need to know about every single one. I'm concerned about this side effect and that side effect, and what's it going to do this, what's going to do that. Well, let's break it down. Let's make things simpler. Let's look at this medicine first, or let's see what the side effect profile is of this based on what you think is going to work for me. I think being able to simplify things and understand it in a calmer manner can go a long way. This is incredibly hard for me because I'm always trying to gather the information and look at every single story and article and everything, and sometimes that's not the best. So I think, for all you patients who are part of the Lown group and you have outstanding physicians, I think using your incredible physicians and guidance and health coaches and everything can go a long way. And I always see it as a bi-directional relationship. So it's not just us saying, oh, I think you should definitely take amlodipine or definitely take metoprolol. No, it's here are a couple choices. Here's what things can work. I think this one might be best for you. It's got the least or the best safety profile. I'll send you an article or two you're happy to review. I think that approach certainly helped me when I've been on the patient side. And I hope can be helpful for you. And this isn't just health related. This is really for all types of information.
I think it's important for all of us to recognize that when we feel anxious, we have a desire to become in control, right? And part of anxiety is a feeling out of control. And to understand that, like that's an okay feeling, and to be able to sit with that uncomfortable feeling, like maybe you get this diagnosis, and if you were to try to learn all those things about all those meds and go online, and I had a patient last week who I was asking her, what's keeping you up so late at night? She's Googling all the side effects of all her medications because she was feeling tired, and which of her medicines could be making her feel tired. And it's overwhelming. And then the more anxious you feel, the more overwhelmed you feel, and the more you want to control it by getting more information. And, really probably the main cause of her fatigue was her lack of sleep, and her lack of sleep was because she was staying up so late reading about side effects. So what I really wanted her to understand is that it's okay to feel anxious. It's okay to feel a little overwhelmed. Turn off the computer and take some deep breaths. And these little mini vacations or these mini meditations that might just take 10 seconds, we all have time to do that. And like you said, you just reset, put your trust in the professionals, in your doctor. You take your job, I'll do my job. You don't have to do my job too, because that's really too much for you. But trying to start with the basics and start with what you know and control what you can control, and let the rest be dealt with how it will be dealt with. Because we'll never control everything. We can't control our teenage children, and we can't control our spouses, and we can't control who's going to win this election, but we can do our little bits and our parts to try to fix the things we can. And then to accept, that's okay. I feel anxious. That's okay. I feel sad. That's okay. Right? Accepting that and not be like, what's the matter with me? I'm anxious. You just cause a second problem.
I think that's a great point, because I do think sometimes it's how hard we are on ourselves that then makes the situation that much worse, right? Because we're all going to feel anxious, we're all going to feel overwhelmed, right? And we have to frame it in a way that it's not a failure, right? When we're assessing how we feel. And I do think that's probably the first tangible step of a good mindfulness practice, right? Is just, the same way you recognize when your mind is wandering, you recognize like, oh gosh, I see how I'm feeling, right? Because then we have that window to kind of to change the pattern. And I know that the three of us, right, being busy physicians, right, we are also exposed to this, right? And it's, taking 5 minutes to breathe in between, patients, or, running to a meeting, right? Or whatever is the next step. And, I think a lot of patients that come to me are super successful, whatever their field they're in, right? And it's the disconnect with, how do I not lose my edge and be still super successful at my job, but also be protective and have time to breathe, right? And I think, if we're thinking about this correctly, you're not really giving up your edge. You're just being reflective and maybe prioritizing other things, along with work. Okay.
I want to read this comment that's in here that is really nice, and it's not a question. It says, I love to hike, but it takes some work. And this is going to get at the fact that sometimes there's this sort of, you got to get over the hump to get to the good part. And I don't like to get up early, but I do it. I get ready for my hike. And when I'm on the trail with my friends, I feel fantastic. I'm super happy at the end on my way home. I love pushing myself to hike longer, and I've made good friends this way, which makes me happy. So ticking the boxes of relationships and exercise and music. How do you advise patients who might say, like, I'm too tired to exercise in the morning. I'm too tired to cook a healthy dinner. I'm exhausted. I just want to grab some ice cream and sit on the couch and watch TV.
It's so hard. And often it's just that first step, that first change. And thank you for this incredible comment, right? It shows that it was hard at the beginning, but once you were able to accomplish that, you saw the benefits of it. So I usually pick one thing with my patients, whether it's going to be nutrition or exercise or sleep related. But let's say exercise. Sometimes it's just that motivator, that one thing. So the person who sent the comment, Madeline, thank you for sharing. I think, the finding someone, right? This showed so many great elements here. So maybe setting that schedule. Tomorrow, I'm going to wake up, or fine, you don't want to wake up early? Fine, let's do it after work. That's fine. Let's pick a time where you're going to be held accountable by one of your best friends, and you're going to get to catch up with your friend, and you're going to do something that is hopefully going to bring you joy, whether it is biking, running, walking, playing basketball, whatever activity it is, but just find that, and you have a buddy to do it with. And once you do something together, that often triggers more and more. So I think what we've learned a lot in the exercise world is, yes, if you're motivated to do it, you can do it on your own, great. That's not a problem. But for so many of us who struggle because we don't like waking up, or we're too tired after work, it's doing it with someone else that can go such a long way. And now we have so many platforms online, whether it's Peloton or, there are many, many other ones like those where you can connect with people virtually, but it doesn't replace connecting with someone in the outdoors, like a day like today, where you can say you're going to go for a beautiful hike or a beautiful walk. And that's what I coach my patients. It's fine to do it once, see how you feel, right? Once you get over that hump, as you mentioned, Dara, things can work out.
I love it.
Yeah, sorry.
Comment on the outdoors, because we actually had a whole podcast or webinar devoted to that last year. Karen Hopman was on, who talked about the science of nature. And I think it's exactly what you said, right? I mean, it really is changing these micro connections in our brain, just because the city is wired different than nature is, right? Mm-hmm. And just removing yourself and being in a green space can have really positive impacts on sleep and blood pressure. So it's important to remember that. So Madeline, thank you for sharing that. I also love what you were saying about, the partnership with exercise, because I do think if you're not looking forward to exercise, you're not going to make it a habit, right? You really have to find your joy in that. So for a lot of people, it's finding community, right? Or just being able to talk and, share other things while you're suffering through your exercise, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or
Absolutely.
finding exercise that doesn't feel like suffering.
Correct. Yeah.
And I often tell patients, just putting on your shoes is sometimes the hardest part, your sneakers, and just go out for 2 or 3 minutes. And most of the time you might get those first 2 or 3 minutes, and then, all right, I'll go 3 or 4 more and I'll go a little longer. But sometimes it's just that initiative that's so hard. And I think, as you said, like putting it on your calendar so that it's on there and you don't have to say in the morning, well, I don't feel like it now. And then after lunch, I don't really feel like it now. And end of the day, now I'm tired. It'll never happen. But making it on your schedule until it becomes a habit, until it becomes fun and stops being painful. And then it'll take on a life of its own.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I think to take that a step further, often, keeping an exercise log. So sometimes when you go to the gym, the first thing they do is, here's your personal exercise log. I want you to prove to yourself that you're going to keep on growing and getting better. So sometimes, just like you said, the first day I did 2 minutes, the second day I did 5 minutes, then I did 10 minutes. And then you reflect on your own on that, but you can also reflect with friends and family. So holding yourself accountable by putting it on the calendar, but also keeping track of your progress is great. And that's fortunately a lot of the modern apps and a lot of the programs and gyms and whatnot do that for us.
And even setting goals, right? That goes hand in hand with that, right? Like where do we really want this to be in 3 months? What do I want to be able to do in a year, right? So I love the log. I think it supports a lot of those aspects.
I'll put a plug. There are a lot of, I don't speak for any exercise platform. There are a lot of amazing programs out there. There is a program that some of you may have heard of called Couch to 5K. So it's actually become like an international program where people talk about and strategize of how do I go from being sedentary to getting up to 5K. And it's a great website too. But that kind of, thank you for putting that in the chat. I think that kind of approach is incredibly helpful. Peloton, now it's not about having the bike or the treadmill. It is an app that actually a lot of workplaces are now reimbursing for gym and wellness, and the app has hundreds of thousands of classes that are excellent. And I'll mention one other platform just because my friend started it. I'll put it in the chat here. It's worth checking out. It's called Burnalong, and it's essentially a community exercise platform where you subscribe to it, and I forget all the logistics of it, but you can be linked to any gym class throughout the country. So let's say you have a friend in California, a friend in Chicago, and yourself, and you're going to meet every day at 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time because you like the class that Janice teaches in the gym in Dallas, Texas. I'm using an example because it's actually very well done. You see each other on the screen and you're taking the class live, and you're picking the class you want from anywhere in the country. It's a very cool platform, and the idea behind it and the reason he started it was really to motivate people to exercise in groups, just like Peloton and Apple Fitness and whatnot. The group setting is huge.
Sounds really great.
Love that. Yeah, there's so much benefit from having a good community, right? And I do think that we're still living through that stress of the pandemic, how isolated still things are as we're like bracing for flu season in this winter, right? So I think that's a great option. I will check it out.
Yes, there. We'll include all these resources. Ellie, behind the screen there, we'll email these all out to everybody when we're done. So, cool. Maybe we can shift gears a little and talk a tiny bit about nutrition before we're out of time, because we've talked a lot about the other legs of a stool. And I do think of this as the legs of a stool, where you really want to, even if you're not going to focus on perfecting the sleep and the stress and the exercise and the nutrition and the substances all at once, at least a little attention, because as you say, fixing one often gets you on the others. But do you have any kind of quick and dirty advice for people to make some healthy tweaks in their diet?
Sure. So I always discuss that I'm a proponent, and as are a lot of my colleagues and organizations, of a whole food plant-based diet, right? A diet based on unprocessed foods, where we include a lot of fruits, vegetables, legumes, whole grains, etc. And I never say, like, I want you to change everything right now. No, it's a process, as you mentioned, right? We're building stools. And my go-to is usually, let's pick one meal. And often I start with one meal a week, and maybe we go to one meal a day. So I tend to always go with breakfast, because I like, as part of my history, I like to get a dietary history, right? What did you eat for breakfast? What did you eat for lunch? What did you eat for dinner? Tell me about the snacks. What are you drinking? And then I get a sense of what they're eating. And a lot of people have a typical American breakfast, you know, a couple eggs, sausage, whole, you know, white bread, etc., a couple of glasses of orange juice. And so I say, okay, you know, it sounds delicious. That's great. And, you know, I'm not telling you to change lunch or dinner, but let's start with breakfast, right? Let's do something easy that can be nutritious, that I enjoy and a lot of people enjoy too. It's really easy. And by the way, it's actually significantly cheaper than what you're eating. How about oatmeal, right? You can buy a nice tub of oatmeal from Costco for $10, $15. It's going to last you like weeks and weeks. Put the oatmeal, chop up some fruit, some nuts, maybe add some cinnamon to it. It's pretty easy to make. It's nutritious, it's filling. Actually, when I eat that way, I actually feel a little bit better than about myself, instead of feeling the heavy feeling often with you know, all the meats and whatnot. But try that, just see how it goes. And I usually will challenge my patients, try that once a week. Just try it once total and let me know how it goes. That's usually my go-to. It's like a small step, and see how things go. And then the other change, I say, you love drinking juice or, you know, Arizona iced tea. It's delicious. No one's going to deny that. But how about we try making a smoothie at home? Smoothies are delicious. And honestly, I think they might be even tastier than the Tropicana juice or the Arizona iced tea. And throw whatever you want in the smoothie, right? My go-to that I like to talk about is, you know, frozen bananas, some chia seeds, some almond milk, some almond butter, maybe a date or two. Just try that. I guarantee it's going to be delicious. And like, that's a nice way of supplementing a snack, or if that's going to be your breakfast, put some oats into it. So for me, it's never an all or nothing approach. It's kind of little steps and trying to incorporate more of a plant-based approach.
That's great. Dara loves smoothies, so we could talk about smoothies all day. Yeah.
I'm trying to keep myself from throwing in well, I can't help it. Frozen spinach, it'll go,
yes.
You know, you can't even see
yes.
it.
Good source of calcium too, right? Yeah. Well,
yes. Go ahead.
Jona, I can't believe that our time is coming to an end. This has been a really fun discussion about so many fun different things. Any parting words of advice for us today?
Yeah, so again, thank you for hosting me. I will say, if anyone's interested in continuing the conversation, either via email or phone call, I'd be happy to do that. And I will leave you with what I started with, right? The better our well-being and emotional health is addressed, the better our physical health can turn out, right? Remember that there's a strong mind-heart connection. And even in times of stress, distress, illness, finding those little glimmers of positive reinforcement, music, something fun, can go a long way. So thank you. Enjoy the beautiful day.
Thank you so much. And thanks to our audience. Thanks for all the questions and the input. We'll see you next time.
Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.